Good morning, David. I'm very pleased to see you on a busy New York theatrical day, I gather.
Yeah, it's 11 a.m. in New York time, and we've been at it since 9:30 with Broadway news just flowing in a way that I haven't seen in a couple of weeks. So spring is here. It feels like the sun is shining, and it feels like we're coming back to life.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I've been, I think it's really been true in London theatre. I mean, you know, as you know, because you follow things so closely, it's been a mental couple of months with massive openings all the time. And yeah, I feel kind of exhausted. And you're about to go into a very similar season of spring openings. And so we thought this was a good moment to catch up on the What's on Stage podcast. And it's with me, as usual, Sarah Crompton from What's on Stage. But because Alex Wood is not with us for a couple of weeks, I'm going rogue, being allowed to go off and invite people I want to talk to onto the podcast. So I've started off with David Gordon from TheaterMania. So hello, David. It's really nice that you're here.
You too. Thank you for having me.
You can get us all very excited about what we're about to see in the spring season on Broadway. And it seems to me that there's a lot of really interesting stuff coming up, but quite a lot of it looks backwards in one way and another.
When you brought that up to me, I just thought it was so interesting that that's how you classified it. And when I think about it, it's so true in ways that I never thought about.
Well, the thing that really struck me, and, you know, stop me if I'm wrong, because you're the expert here, so I really want you to take the lead, but Boop, which is the big new musical by David Foster and directed by Jerry Mitchell. My mother used to talk about Betty Boop as a cartoon character, but so she dates back to the 20s and 30s. I don't have any sense of this show or what it might be. I mean, tell me about it.
It's so interesting because I feel like I don't really have a great sense of it either, but I know more than, the layperson. And what's really interesting is that it's basically, Betty Boop is trying to find herself outside of her cartoon world, and ends up time traveling to New York City circa the present, I believe.
Right, okay.
And is trying to sort of discover who she is as a woman in the world beyond, the cartoon figure that everybody knows. And I think that's a really interesting way into, a story like this, sort of Barbie-esque, even though this and Barbie, this has been in the works for so long, it probably predates Barbie to some degree.
It feels like Who Framed Roger Rabbit combined with Barbie, doesn't it? That idea of a figure coming out of a cartoon into the real world feels very Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Well, yeah. Barbie finding herself. It's interesting.
And it looks super colorful, and the songs that I've heard are great, and it's Jerry Mitchell, so it's going to be super athletic in terms of the choreography, and it's just one of those shows where even saying all of that, I have no idea what to expect, but with that team, you're in good hands.
Yeah. What are you looking forward to, David? What things are on your agenda that are coming up?
What am I looking forward to? So we saw on Friday night, we saw Buena Vista Social Club, which I don't know if that's really crossed your radar at all in the UK, if you've even heard anything about it.
Not really. No. Well, I know it's there, and I know it's based on the album. Is it on the really successful album again, retro from the 80s.
It's a semi-fictional biographical musical of how the Buena Vista Social Club album was created. Buena Vista Social Club being the name of a club in Cuba before the revolution. And the album in the 80s brought together some legendary Cuban musicians to record all of the songs of yore for a new generation. And the album itself has a huge resonance in the Latin American and Cuban American communities here. And they present all the songs from the album live on stage with, full bands just blasting your heads off with sound. And it's, if you're into music, if you're like a music person beyond if you're a theater person, if you're a music person, it is like one of the most musically thrilling nights of theater you can have, because it's just a wall of sound played authentically and sung beautifully, and it's so fun, and I can't wait for more people to see it.
So it's so interesting though, because I mean, I do feel that album was the soundtrack of the 80s. Everybody, you walked into anybody's home, any point, and that album was playing. And it's really interesting that it's getting a new lease of life as a show. And actually, from how you're describing it, it's a show very much based on the same appeal of lost Cuban sounds, of that sense that there was a great generation of musicians that, yeah, we all ought to be listening to. And so it is interesting that they've chosen to do it at this moment and set it in a biographical manner. Which theatre is that opening at?
That's at the Schoenfeld Theatre on Broadway. It's playing 2 doors down from Operation Mincemeat.
Oh, yeah? Operation Mincemeat. We'll come on to that.
And across the street from the picture of Dorian Gray.
Right. Wow. Yeah, we'll come on to those shows. But again, just picking up my retro theme slightly, I'm excited though by the fact that we've now got Jonathan Groff as Bobby Darin, which again is looking back to a lost sound. I'm always slightly mystified by the fascination for Bobby Darin. I don't know if that's just me or that is a kind of Brit American thing. That it seems to me that Americans are much more interested in Bobby Darin than I am, but that might just be me.
I think there is a fascination with him in America. He wrote he sang and co-wrote the big songs of the Fit, like Splish Splash, and covered Beyond the Sea. And, these songs have such resonance for, my parents' generation. It's one of the few shows that my mom actually wants to. My mom actually was like, can I come with you to see the Bobby Darin show? And I was like, you absolutely can, because she's a fan of the music.
I think that's really interesting. Do you think it's Broadway playing into its older demographic? The West End, I think, has been trying very hard to play into a younger demographic. So we have all these star-filled dramas given a modern take with modern music and, updated feel. Whereas Broadway feels as if it's leaning a bit into the idea that its theatregoers are essentially older and more affluent, and they will like Boop and Bobby Darin. I mean, what do you feel about that?
I completely agree with that, and I think you can even extend it to George Clooney and Good Night and Good Luck playing Edward R. Murrow. A figure that, people know the name of today but aren't nearly as familiar with as they even were, when the Good Night and Good Luck movie came out 20-ish years ago. And I think they definitely are playing to, the generation that can afford things, and it does seem like a lot of older feeling shows this year, even down to the Pirates of Penzance,
right,
which is being rechristened as Pirates the Penzance Musical and given a sort of New Orleans jazzy flair.
But is it the Gilbert and Sullivan original? I mean, it's changed, but it's still the Gilbert and Sullivan.
It's the Gilbert and Sullivan Pirates of Penzance with a new book and a reorchestrated score.
Wow.
And I'm actually really excited for that one.
Why are you excited about it?
Because I like the Pirates of Penzance. I'm one of I'm just, my wife always looks at me like I'm crazy, but Pirates, I can sing Modern Major General, and
yeah,
it's got a good cast. Ramin Karimloo is in it, and David Hyde Pierce, and Jinx Monsoon, and it's just I don't know what to expect from it, but it's going to be something. Yeah.
The last Pirates of Penzance I think I saw on film, but it was from Broadway, was the Kevin Kline. That was another retelling, wasn't it? And you're right, the cast is mouth-watering again. I loved Kevin Kline as the Pirate King. It was one of the great sort of breakthroughs of my theatrical life, actually. I really adore that idea of him being the Pirate King. So yeah, I can really see it working. And it is a fabulous, mouth-watering cast, though it's just that odd idea that, again, I suppose it's a difference in sensibilities of we don't see much doily card anymore. I haven't really seen much Gilbert and Sullivan in London for a long time. And the fact that Broadway and the Americans are thinking that it's worth saving and it's worth looking at again, I'm entirely with them. I love them. I love all those shows. I love The Gondoliers. I love Pirates of Penzance, because they're what I grew up on.
I can't remember the last time a Gilbert and Sullivan operetta has been on Broadway.
It is. It's a very, very long time ago. So it will be a real test case of how much appeal there is for that kind of It is an operetta, isn't it? So that is a different musical form, but with a lot of humor in it.
I'm just researching now. I think the last Gilbert and Sullivan on Broadway predates me.
Surely not, David.
Yeah.
So how long ago does that make it?
37 years as opposed to my 36 years.
Wow. Okay, that is something. And just circling back to the George Clooney, that's interesting because I think, it's a long time since it was a movie. And I always thought it didn't do quite as well as a movie as everyone hoped it would. So to bring it to Broadway is quite a big gamble for him, isn't it?
Yeah. Especially since he's never, he's done theater early in his career, but, he hasn't done theater in probably 40 years. And it's all resting on his shoulders because he co-wrote it with Grant Heslov, his longtime, writing and producing partner. And he's the above the title star as Edward R. Murrow, which is not the role that he played in the movie.
Right.
I think it was David Strathairn that played Edward R. Murrow in the film.
It was.
And he's done interviews now where he's straight up said he feels the nerves coming in. He's the draw. He's the one that people are coming to see, and he really needs to figure out how to pace himself through 8 shows a week so he doesn't disappoint anybody.
And it is difficult. I mean, we discovered with Signori Weaver, it's slightly different because she was doing Shakespeare in The Tempest over here. But, she had a Broadway career, and she had indeed done Shakespeare in the States, though I think that was a good 20 years ago. But a lot of weight rested on her shoulders, and it was very tricky. I don't think she did quite. I personally didn't feel that she did rise to it. I felt she was problematic in that role. But it is the same thing for Clooney. It's very hard when you've had a long break away from stage and it's made you really a superstar like he is and like Weaver is, then to come back and greet all your generations of fans who regard you as a demigod. It must be really, really terrifying.
It really must be. And, I have to give a lot of credit to all of the stars who've come out to Broadway this year. And it has been a very star-driven season. People like Robert Downey Jr. on his 2-month break between, doing movies, came and did a brand new American play about, a writer dealing with AI. And in his case, it helped because he'd been developing the play with the director Bartlett Sher and the writer Ayad Akhtar, but the role fit him like a glove, and you could never tell that he'd never done theater before.
Yeah, it must have been amazing.
It was, and that's not always the case either, because you can, like you said, you can often tell when a celebrity is sort of out of their depths coming back for the first time. And I'm curious to see how someone like George Clooney does. Denzel Washington and Jake Gyllenhaal, I'm not terribly worried about because they're stage beasts.
Yeah, they'll be okay. Remind me what they're doing. My mind's gone.
They're doing Othello.
That's right.
Yeah, with Denzel as Othello and Jake as Iago and making money hand over fist.
Yeah, but you want to see that, don't you? I really want to see that show. I mean,
I feel like everybody wants to see that show.
Yeah. Yeah, Denzel is Othello to speak.
Yeah.
Something.
Has he ever done theater in the UK?
Not that, no.
That you can remember?
No, not that I can remember. And actually, I think not. I don't think he's ever done anything here. And yeah, I might be trying to cross the Atlantic to see him.
He is a beast on stage. He's born for it.
Yeah, I can utterly imagine that.
And you could just tell that that's where he started his career.
And also he's kept doing it quite regularly, hasn't he? Because he's done all those August Wilson and he's come back on stage and on a film in those shows. And so you feel that he's kept that theatrical muscle working, which is a bit different than the people just jumping in. I suppose the other notable person jumping in is Kieran Culkin, who's coming in Glengarry Glen Ross, which is the play that everybody seems to want to do. But he's not been on a stage for a while, has he?
No, I was talking to my wife about this yesterday. I'd seen him in 2 plays, and I wish I remembered more about them. They weren't even that. One was long ago, and the other was, probably within the last 10 years, before Succession, before he really became.
What was that?
A hot commodity. This Is Our Youth.
Oh yes. Oh gosh, I forgot.
The Kenneth Lonergan play was. Yeah, it was him and Michael Cera. And I remember enjoying it. I don't remember much else about it. But I'm excited to see him play Glengarry as like, a grown-up now.
I'm really embarrassed to say that I saw This Is Your Youth, which means not only can't I remember much about it, I've actually forgotten that Kieran Culkin was in it, which is interesting. Because, certainly Michael Cera is the one I remember for that show. And so that's fascinating that he wasn't the name. And again, he will have the weight of carrying it this time, which is different for him. And I think that is a burden. And I get the feeling that in the awards season, he has been, though obviously it has been quite nice for him to be able to say, actually, I can't turn up to any ceremonies, just give me the prize because I'm working on Broadway. You also have the slight sense that he really is working on Broadway, that there is a level of anxiety about that again, of stepping into the show.
I can't imagine what, we are recording this on Monday, March 10th. They start previews tonight. They had their final dress rehearsal on Saturday, literally 6 days after he won the Oscar for Real Pain. And I cannot imagine what the past 2.5 weeks have been like for him, both mentally, physically, spiritually, just closing out that one chapter, starting this new one, while also like sort of becoming one of the most famous people in the world.
Yeah. And the Succession effect is extraordinary because the other Succession star who is opening on Broadway is a show that I have seen. So Sarah Snook is bringing Picture of Dorian Gray to Broadway. And that's so much a show, again, built around her and would not have happened without Succession. I mean, you just can't imagine an experimental show, one-woman show, telling an Oscar Wilde novel with cameras and special effects and her would have happened without Succession. It's absolutely a Succession project.
I cannot wait to see it too. We have it booked. We're going next week. We're seeing that and Othello back to back actually. And Dorian Gray was playing last February, and Leia had just started when I was in London in February 2024, and thus I didn't get to see it because I was leaving right as they were starting previews. But I'm glad that I get to see it here. I mean, the Succession people going back to theater immediately after the show goes off the air is a subject of a podcast in itself between the two of them, and Jeremy Strong winning a Tony for Enemy of the People. And you've had Brian Cox and J. Smith Cameron, and it's the perk of casting New York theater people in your TV shows, man. They'll get right back to it when they're done.
Yeah, and it's a really nice thing of a payback and bringing a different audience in. What's the anticipation like around Picture of Dorian Gray? Because Oscar Wilde has such a different, I suspect, cultural status here than in the States. I always think here people, regard him as so significant, both in terms of queer theatre and queer rights, but also in terms of just coining some of the most famous phrases in the English language. And people are always really anxious to see them again. I mean, is there the same level of anticipation, do you think, as Sarah Snook arrives at Broadway?
I think it's more anticipation for her, coming off the wave of Succession and coming off the acclaim of Dorian Gray when she did it last year. I think the title helps, obviously. I think it's a well-known title, even if, it's not the most popular title in the literary canon here, the way it probably is in the UK. But I don't think she has to worry. I think she's the crowd. I think Build It and They Will Come, and I think they're going to come with full force for her.
Yeah, I must say, seeing it in London, it is an astonishing tour de force. You can't quite believe that she does it because it's so big and she is so dominant. And the energy, apart from the skill required, which is immense, the energy required is extraordinary. And I do think here she managed absolutely to get the audience eating out of the palm of her hand. So there were, the night I was there, and there were odd technical glitches because it is a really complex show technically. It's got cameras and lights and movement and films that they made before and films she has to interact with. And she did all that with such grace and power. It really changed my view of her as an actor, just the absolute command that she brings to it. It was exceptional.
It always surprises me when I see interviews with her and when I hear her actual speaking voice and her Australian accent, because I always thought her New York was so good as Shiv on Succession that I always forget that she's not from here.
Well, we've just had the Seagull open here, where with Thomas Ostomer, with this amazing cast with Cate Blanchett and Cody Smith-McPhee and Tom Burke and Emma Corrin and everybody.
I'm jealous.
Well, it will come, I think. I really think that's another builder to They Will Come. I think that will probably make it to the States. But the surprise is because he's asked them all to speak in their normal voices. Lots of the voices are unfamiliar because Cody Smith-McPhee is Australian as well. So, that my main knowledge of him was through Power of the Dog. And then he speaks with quite a pronounced Australian accent. And Blanchett, of course, is so much of a chameleon vocally that suddenly to hear her in her real voice is fascinating. And it does have, I think, an authenticity and an integrity that really works. And you're also about to get one of the other radical Chekhovs that London audiences have seen, or British audiences have seen, because you're getting Benedict Andrews' The Cherry Orchard with its original cast. Many voices,
yes.
German, English. I didn't love that show as much as some people. So again, what do you think the anticipation is on that?
I can't call myself a Chekhov or I can't call myself a diehard for any of the old writers, no offense to any of them. But I talked to Adil Akhtar the other day, who plays Lepakin in this Cherry Orchard, and he got me really jazzed for it. I like Nina Haas from Tor. That's really the only thing that I've seen her in.
Yeah.
But and I went to the Donmar for the first time this past February, and I saw the producer. I can't believe it was my first time at the Donmar after all my years of going back and forth to London. And it's such a diametrically opposed space to St. Anne's Warehouse in Brooklyn, where Cherry Orchard will be playing.
Yes.
For starters, because St. Anne's Warehouse in New York it's so much larger, and it's also a flexible space that you can configure it however you want, really. And then I'm in the Donmar, and it's, so compact, and you feel like you're on top of the stage from anywhere you sit, basically. And I'm curious for them to see if it can have the same aura, because I know the audience, they were in and out of the audience. The audiences were up close with them. But he got me pumped for it in a way that I don't think I was before.
How did he get you pumped for it? Because I did think he was, well, I actually thought that he and Nina Haas were the two best things in it, apart from June Watson, actually, who is not coming to New York, because I think she has just perhaps decided that in her 80s it's all a bit much. But, they were just brilliant in it. And it's an interesting production because it's very much, oh, look at us, we're going to tear up Chekhov. And they literally tear up the set, which I liked, and which, again, I can't really imagine happening in St. Anne's because it's such a big space. And it will take them hours to take the set to pieces. But we'll see.
I'm into we're going to take this, this classic that everybody thinks of, or many people think of as stuffy and old, and sort of breathe new life into it and tear it to shreds and figure out if we can sort of contemporize it in a way that makes it feel relevant while still remaining true to its roots. That's at least what I got from it, talking to him and from looking at the photos. And he mentioned at one point there's they start dancing to a Nick Cave song or something, and it sounds like it's what I want to see out of a Chekhov revival.
Well, I'm going to call you back on this podcast to do your reviews of all of this.
Yeah, we'll confer in April when I see it.
When you've seen it. But the other classic that's getting, and a very specifically British twist, I think, is Rebecca Frecknell's Streetcar Named Desire, which is opening on Broadway. Great anticipation around that with Paul Mescal as Stanley. And I think there is so much excitement because Frecknell has been such a success at rethinking American classics. That is how she made her name, with Summer and Smoke and so on, which was amazing, which also starred Patsy Ferran and Angela Varson. So I think, it will be fascinating to see. It's very much an Coles to Newcastle situation of taking a Tennessee Williams to Broadway, and a very radical take on Tennessee Williams, very stripped back, completely different view of Blanche than I've ever seen. So I don't know how you feel about that one, and how people are feeling.
So I'm looking forward to seeing it. So it's also going to Brooklyn, not technically Broadway. It's going to Brooklyn to Brooklyn Academy of Music, which is where these sort of prestige shows go for limited runs. And I think it's only happening there because, Paul had a month in his schedule that he could do this before whatever movie project he has coming up next. But I'm very curious to see how it's going to be received in the wake of Cabaret last season, which was not very well received. The Rebecca Frecknell-directed Cabaret on Broadway.
Yeah.
People did not like that one bit.
I was fascinated by that.
Yeah, and I'm so curious to see if Streetcar lands with a similar sort of thud, or if people appreciate it more. We're going next week. I haven't seen it yet, so I can't really speak about it.
What do you think did for Cabaret? Why did people react so badly against it? Because they really did, and yeah.
Yeah, I think part of the issue with Cabaret here is that, unlike in the UK, the Sam Mendes Cabaret, the one that Alan Cumming did, is so ingrained in our cultural memory on Broadway, especially since, they didn't just do it once, they did it twice. They revived it 10 years ago with Michelle Williams, and then Emma Stone went into it, and Sienna Miller. And the first version of it ran for about 7-8 years. So we have a cabaret that is still so close in our memories that I think a lot of people weren't ready to look at cabaret differently. But, I know from our critic, he didn't like the performances. He thought it was all very shouty and didn't appreciate the sort of in-your-faceness of it, and he didn't really think it trusted the material. I'm curious to see if Cabaret ends up running here as long as it's been running.
Yes, I am. I wouldn't bet on it. Though clever recasting will carry it a long way. I mean, I think the casting in the West End has been brilliant. So, at the moment it's Billy Porter and Marisha Wallace. And I think people really, really just love it. And I don't know. And I don't know about Streetcar because it's not radical in the same way. It's not as in your face, certainly. But it is radical in a different way, that it looks at the play so differently, I think. And it makes it a play about two sisters rather than about a Stanley. And I, again, wonder if the historic impact of Marlon Brando down the years resonates louder in the States than it does here.
I've heard Paul Mescal's take on Stanley described as very mean, and I'm looking forward to seeing what that's all about.
Yeah, it will be fascinating. It will be fascinating. Anyhow, I envy you seeing it because I loved it. I mean, I did love it. And I thought Patsy Farron's performance was just extraordinary. And we also had this strange thing of her having walked into the show with very little rehearsal and yet giving a performance that seemed to be absolutely thought through in every single detail. So having had time to live in it and bring even more depth to it, I think will be fascinating.
And it must be a really fascinating time for her to be doing it here too, because 5 years ago she was on Broadway in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, a production that closed because of COVID and never reopened.
Never reopened, yeah, exactly.
And now she's here back in New York.
Yeah. Yeah, because she'd have been so disappointed with that Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, because it's a part she was destined to play, I think, in many, many ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never seen her live. I'm excited to see her live.
I've left the best to last. Operation Mincemeat. We've
Operation Mincemeat.
We've just run your special interview with the Operation Mincemeat cast as a bonus episode of the podcast.
Did you enjoy it?
The podcast, yes, very much. It's great. One of the things I do in my laughingly known spare time is do some teaching of students at the British American Drama Academy, and quite a few of them have been to see Operation Mincemeat and utterly adored it and thought it was brilliant piece of theatrical magic, which I think it really is. And regarding them as a test audience for how it will go down on Broadway, I mean, they really liked it, though they were struck by the immense Britishness of the whole thing. And what's your feeling about it?
It was really fascinating to talk to all five of them together and hear how the whole question of is it too British for Broadway has sort of dampened their spirits a little bit over the course of, the 6 months or whatever while the transfer was being discussed. And I think it was Jack Malone that said, when you hear that phrase so often, like you basically think like, is your piece worthless anywhere else? And I don't think that's the case because it is, beyond the mayhem of it, beyond the fact that there are 5 people playing 90 characters or however many characters there are, 87, I think. It's a really interesting story that certainly here we don't know about. It's not a story that's taught here in school. It's not something that I really knew about until I saw it at the Fortune Theater last year.
Yeah. I don't think people know it here.
So interesting.
It's a really good story that they have put into a new form. And it does have that virtue of theatrical magic. I think the way that they have done the film is out there, Colin Firth and hugely enjoyable. It tells the story well. But there is something about Operation Mincemeat, of that engagement of the entire cast in it, that makes it strangely moving, strangely magical. I have highish hopes for it. I hope it does well. And though we talk about them being sort of two different theatrical cultures, there is a sense in which actually British shows often make breakthroughs on Broadway as well. I think back to all the big musicals of the Lloyd Webber, dominance era, where it looked as if the Brits were completely going to dominate Broadway for a long time. And in fact, it's all settled down so that they changed, I think, in some ways what musicals could do. But also, people liked them, so there wasn't this kind of great divide of different cultures.
And I think people will, if all it takes is a good story to really make the difference, and Operation Mincemeat is a good story, exceedingly well performed. And they have you from the second it starts. And, I knew nothing about it when I saw it at the Fortune Theater. I went into it almost completely blind. And then Jack Malone sings Dear Bill. And I'm like, where did this come from?
Yeah.
And I think people are going to have the same reaction here. I think it's going to be a real discovery for a lot of people.
Are they going to have to pay Broadway prices? I suppose that's always the thing.
That's the $175 question, isn't it?
Yes, or the $575 question. If you're watching Denzel Washington.
I wasn't thinking the premium. I wasn't thinking the premium seats. I was thinking the cheap orchestra seats.
I know. Well, I guess but again, I'm going to go back to my theme at the start. If you're going for an older audience, and if Ed Morrow can still speak to that older audience, then definitely the story of Operation Mincemeat can speak to that older audience, because it is a story of wartime heroism and stiff upper lip and bravery in the face of innumerable odds. And from that point of view, it will have broad appeal, I think.
I think so too. And I think if they start marketing to the right school groups, the school groups that are selling out, matinees of The Outsiders and The Great Gatsby, because those are, still popular. Going back to the literature question that Dorian Gray brings up, The Outsiders and The Great Gatsby are two musicals playing on Broadway based on books that are still part of the American, school education system. And I think if Mincemeat starts broadcasting to, or starts going out to schools and saying, add us to your curriculum, basically, I think they'll find just as eager an audience.
which brings me to my very last point about things I'm looking forward to on Broadway. Not that I'm going to be there and seeing them, though I'm hoping to get over at some point. I'm not there in the next.
You should come. It's very nice here in the spring.
I know. I always seem to, this tangent, but I always seem to end up coming to the States in the autumn, which is lovely, and there are always a lot of big openings in the autumn as well. But I never quite managed to time that spring awakening arrival. So I must make some effort to get over this year. Because the other thing I'm interested in is the Coleman Domingo produced show, which you tell me is not, strictly speaking, on Broadway. I always merge everything together.
Technically, it's at New York Theater Workshop. It's called Lights Out, Nat King Cole. He wrote it with Patricia McGregor, who is running New York Theater Workshop now. And it's the story of Nat King Cole and Sammy Davis Jr., played by two actors who, I'll watch them do anything. It's Dule Hill from West Wing and Daniel J. Watts, who was on Broadway and as Ike Turner in the Tina Turner musical. Yeah, I think that one's going to be really cool. And I think that one promises to be something that it's going to take a lot of people by surprise, too.
Regular listeners to this podcast know I am obsessed with Coleman Domingo. And
who isn't obsessed with Coleman Domingo?
You only had to watch him at the Oscars to know he was the person you most wanted to go to a party with in the whole world.
Yeah.
And utter charmer and absolutely unbelievably brilliant actor. But also he's clearly interested in the way that those major figures of the 40s and 50s told us something about the United States and about racial attitudes and talent as well, because simultaneously with having that on off-Broadway, New York Theatre Workshop, he is producing the transfer of Ryan Calais Cameron's Retrograde, which of course is about Sidney Poitier and the McCarthy era in the 50s and his difficulty in getting work despite being the most glamorous and famous person in the world at that point. So that's really, and how they tried to use his power as a movie star for political ends. So obviously Domingo's got an interest in using those amazing figures from the past to tell us something about our contemporary times.
I mean, even if you look to the movie Rustin too, it's the same thing.
Yeah. Yes, of course.
He's one of those actors. He's another one. I'll watch him do anything.
Yeah.
And I wish he was in both of those shows, but I'm glad we're getting them on my side and your side of the pond, nonetheless.
Well, yeah, and he's got brilliant casts in both, so that will be great. And hopefully we'll get to see him do something quite soon. The one other thing further ahead to look forward to, which has just been announced this week, is the transfer of James Graham's Punch, which is coming in, which is fascinating that.
Yeah.
Again, that's quite a British show about very Nottingham based on a true story, but transcendent really in its appeal for compassion and redemption and the way that restorative justice might be better than retributive justice. I saw it this week and was immensely moved and impressed by it. It's a terrific show.
I'm hoping that Julie Hesmond-Hay comes over with it because I know her from Mr. Bates versus, I know she has a much larger resume in the UK, but I know her from Mr. Bates versus the Post Office here, which is a series that is so sad. It was hard to watch almost as you watch all of these people sort of have their lives ruined and taken advantage of. And she's just a terrific actor.
I can't imagine it without her in the sense that she is one of those actors who on a stage is just so real and so natural. And the way that she absorbs information, so it's astonishingly moving that she manages to make that act of listening as well as speaking incredibly empathetic and real. And I can't imagine it without her. So I hope too that she comes over with it. And so we'll watch this space. Where's it on in September? Where's it coming to?
It's coming to Manhattan Theater Club, Samuel J. Friedman Theater. James Graham has a longstanding relationship with them. They did Ink on Broadway several years ago, in the pre-COVID era. And I'm glad he's being given a chance to bounce back after Tammy Faye
Yes, which
earlier this year came and went.
that another show that that didn't really land here, I don't think either.
No.
It was just hugely enjoyable, but it didn't. You kind of felt it hadn't got legs.
But that's a story for another day.
Story for another day, and very rare for James Graham, it should be said, who is a remarkable success rate both on TV and on stage.
Yes, he is.
So it's a very rare, only slight misfire it's still got there. Anyhow, David, I think that probably is a perfect place to stop. It is lovely to talk to you. Thank you very much. I shall be calling on you again.
Sarah. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for coming.
Please, I'll be here.
Great. Thank you, David. And that's it from us both on the What's on Stage podcast. Thank you.
Make sure you like, follow, subscribe, leave a comment, rate, or just generally share the podcast with your friends. We will be back with new episodes next week. And if you have got a question for us, make sure you ping it to feedback@whatsonstage.com.